The most brutal and inhumane arena shows of ancient Rome that crossed the LineRome was loud long before the crowds reached the arena. From early morning, people poured through the streets, laughing, arguing, eating, and talking about what they expected to see. Vendors sold food, souvenirs, and small lucky charms. Parents brought children. Friends placed bets. To many, this was not a dark day. It was a holiday. The great arena stood at the center of it all, massive and proud. Its stone walls rose high into the sky, a symbol of Rome's power and wealth. From the outside, it looked like a place of glory. Inside, it was designed to impress, to control, and to overwhelm the senses. The noise echoed endlessly, making every cheer feel bigger and every moment feel important. For the rulers of Rome, these events were more than entertainment. They were tools. Emperors and politicians understood the crowd well. If people were fed and amused, they asked fewer questions. Games kept minds busy and emotions distracted. When life was hard, the arena offered excitement. When leaders feared unrest, they offered shows. At first, these public displays were not meant to be endless or extreme. Long ago, they were tied to ceremonies honoring the dead. They were serious, controlled, and limited. But Rome grew. Its borders expanded. Its wealth increased. And with that growth came hunger for more excitement, more shock, more spectacle. The audience slowly changed too. What once seemed intense soon felt ordinary. What once caused silence now caused boredom. To keep attention, organizers had to push further each time. The goal was no longer balance or meaning. The goal was reaction. People came expecting to feel something strong. Surprise, fear, thrill. The arena became a place where limits were tested, not questioned. The people sitting in the best seats were close to power. Senators, generals, and wealthy families watched comfortably, shaded from the sun. Higher up sat common citizens, packed tightly together. Though divided by class, they were united by attention. All eyes were fixed on the center. To the crowd, what happened below often felt distant, almost unreal. The scale of the space and the noise of thousands made it easy to forget that real lives were involved. Individuals became figures. Moments became scenes. Empathy faded under excitement. Many in the audience believed this was the natural order of the world. Rome ruled, therefore Rome decided. Those who stood in the arena were often labeled as enemies, criminals, or outsiders. Words stripped them of identity long before they stepped into the sand. Once labeled, it became easier not to care. Children learned early to cheer at the right moments. They copied their parents, laughing when others laughed, shouting when others shouted. Over time, these reactions felt normal. The arena shaped behavior just as much as it reflected it. Emperors understood this deeply. Some rulers were generous with games, holding them often and on a large scale. Others were careful, using them strategically. But nearly all understood that popularity could be built inside those walls faster than anywhere else. A successful show could erase anger over high taxes, food shortages, or political mistakes. A disappointing show, however, could turn public favor quickly. So organizers competed with one another, always trying to create something bigger, louder, and more unforgettable than before. As years passed, the meaning of the games shifted. Skill and discipline became less important than shock. Stories spread of events that were designed not for fairness but for impact. The line between sport and punishment began to blur. Some people in the crowd sensed this change, even if they could not fully explain it. A few felt uneasy, though they still attended. Others felt proud, seeing these displays as proof that Rome feared nothing and no one. Writers of the time recorded both admiration and discomfort. Some praised the strength and order of the events. Others quietly questioned what it said about a society that needed such displays to feel united. Still, the crowd kept coming. The arena offered something daily life could not, a feeling of power. People who felt small in their own lives could shout, judge, and influence outcomes with their voices. A raised hand, a chant, a roar, it all mattered here. For a moment, they felt in control. This emotional release became addictive. The louder the crowd reacted, the more organizers pushed. Silence was failure. Shock was success. The city itself seemed built around this idea. Roads led toward the arena. Schedules were planned around game days. Conversations returned again and again to what had been seen, what would be seen next, and whether it would be better or worse than before. As expectations rose, restraint fell. What once would have been unthinkable slowly became acceptable, not overnight, but step by step. A small change here, another there. Each time, the crowd adjusted. Rome did not wake up one day cruel. It became that way through repetition and reward. Even those who felt discomfort often stayed silent. Speaking out against popular entertainment could make a person seem weak or disloyal. It was easier to blend into the noise than stand apart from it. And so the arena continued to grow, not just in size but in influence. It shaped culture, values, and memory. It taught people what mattered and what did not. Over time, it taught them that spectacle was more important than compassion. This was the foundation on which everything else was built. Before the extreme events, before the stories that would later trouble historians, there was this moment in Rome's history, when excitement replaced reflection, and when entertainment began to demand more than it should have. The crowd did not see a line being crossed. They only saw the show improving. And that was how it began. Rome admired strength, but it rarely cared about the cost of producing it. Behind the cheers and public pride, there was another world that most people never saw. It existed far from the bright stone seats and loud celebrations. It was quiet, controlled, and ruled by routine. This was the world of the fighters who made the games possible. Most of them did not choose this life. Some were captured during wars far from Rome. Others were punished for crimes, real or claimed. A few were desperate men who volunteered, believing the arena might offer food, shelter, or a chance at recognition. But once inside, all were treated the same. They were no longer seen as people with pasts. They were seen as resources. Training schools were tightly run. Days followed strict schedules. Bodies were shaped through repetition and discipline. Strength was valued, but obedience mattered more. Every movement was watched. Every mistake was corrected. The goal was not freedom or honor. The goal was performance. Those who owned these fighters saw them as property. They invested money into training, food, and care, but only because it improved results. Care had limits. Kindness was rare. A fighter's worth was measured by how much attention he could bring, how long he could last, and how loudly the crowd responded. Some fighters became well known. Their names were whispered in markets. Their images appeared on walls. People admired them without knowing them. Fame created distance. The more admired a fighter became, the easier it was to forget his lack of choice. For every popular figure, there were many others whose names were never remembered. They trained just as hard, suffered just as much, and disappeared without notice. The crowd never asked where they went. Life inside the training grounds was a strange mix of order and fear. Fighters formed bonds, knowing only they understood each other's situation. They shared food, stories, and quiet moments. But they also knew they might be placed against one another. Trust existed, but it was fragile. Every announcement of upcoming games brought tension. Names were read, assignments were given. Some felt relief, others felt dread. The uncertainty weighed heavily. Waiting was often worse than action. Outside, the public imagined courage and glory. Inside, the fighters thought about survival. They thought about pain, exhaustion, and the long days that followed each event. They thought about injuries that never fully healed. They thought about families they might never see again. Many believed that skill could save them. Training encouraged this belief. Discipline was praised. Focus was rewarded. But gradually, the rules changed. Events became less about balance and more about outcome. The fairness that once existed faded. Some shows were no longer designed to test ability. They were designed to guarantee an end. Fighters noticed this first. They felt it in the planning, in the pairings, in the lack of choice. The arena was becoming a place where survival was optional, not expected. This shift was subtle at first. A rule adjusted, a tradition removed, a decision made for excitement rather than safety. Most people did not notice. They only noticed that the games felt more intense. Organizers explained these changes as progress. They spoke of tradition, honor, and public demand. They claimed the crowd wanted more realism, more emotion, more drama, and the crowd agreed, often without thinking deeply. Fighters had no voice in these decisions. Refusal was not an option. Obedience was enforced not just by rules but by consequences. The arena was presented as an opportunity, but it functioned as a trap. Some fighters tried to protect one another in small ways. A pause held a moment longer. A movement softened when possible. These quiet acts were rarely noticed, but they mattered deeply to those involved. Still, the system moved forward. Individual kindness could not slow it. As shows grew more extreme, recovery time shrank. Rest was shortened. Pressure increased. Mistakes became more costly. The idea of a fair contest was slowly replaced by the idea of a spectacle. The crowd, far removed from this world, continued to cheer. They saw strong bodies and dramatic moments. They did not see exhaustion behind the scenes. They did not see fear carried silently back to sleeping quarters. Children admired fighters as heroes. Merchants used their images to sell goods. Songs were written. Stories were exaggerated. The reality became hidden behind praise. Even some fighters began to believe the stories. Hope can survive in difficult places. A few believed success might lead to freedom or respect. Sometimes it did. Often it did not. Freedom, when granted, was rare and controlled. It was presented as proof that the system worked. But these examples were exceptions, not rules. They were used to justify everything else. The majority remained trapped in cycles they could not escape. Days blended together, training, waiting, performing, recovering, over and over. As events grew more intense, injuries increased. Some fighters were no longer given time to heal fully. The expectation was simple: appear strong no matter the cost. Weakness was not tolerated. Those who could no longer perform were quietly removed. The public never noticed. New faces replaced old ones. The cycle continued. A few thinkers of the time began to question this system. They wrote about dignity and self-control. They argued that entertainment should not erase compassion. Their words existed, but they were soft against the roar of the crowd. Power favored silence. Fighters learned to hide emotion. Fear was dangerous. Sadness slowed reaction. Survival depended on control, both physical and mental. Yet inside, many wondered when the line had moved so far. They remembered older stories where skill mattered, where rules protected both sides. Those stories felt distant now, like memories from another world. The arena no longer felt like a place of challenge. It felt like a place of disposal. Still, the gates opened. Still, names were called. Still, the crowd gathered. The fighters stepped forward because they had no alternative. And as the cheers rose once more, the distance between the audience and the people below grew even wider, making it easier than ever for the system to continue without question. This was how the human cost of the games became invisible, hidden behind tradition, excitement, and the belief that what was popular must also be right. And the arena demanded more. As the games continued to change, the purpose of the arena shifted again. It was no longer only a place for trained fighters or structured contests. It became a stage where authority was displayed in its most public form. What happened there sent a message to everyone watching, even if that message was not spoken aloud. Punishment, once handled quietly, was now brought into the open. Leaders believed that public lessons were more powerful than private ones. If people could see the consequences of breaking rules, they would think twice before doing the same. The arena, already full of attention, became the chosen place for these lessons. Those sent there were often already judged by the state. Some were accused of serious crimes. Others were political problems, people whose beliefs or words made leaders uncomfortable. Many were outsiders with no strong voice to defend them. Once labeled, their fate was sealed. To make these punishments more acceptable to the crowd, they were turned into stories. Organizers dressed them in costumes and gave them roles drawn from popular myths and legends. The audience recognized the characters and understood the endings. This made the events feel familiar, even entertaining, rather than disturbing. By turning real people into symbols, the system removed their humanity. They were no longer seen as individuals with fear, memory, or family. They became parts of a script. The crowd focused on the story, not the person inside it. This approach worked well. People talked about the creativity of the shows, the clever use of tradition, and the dramatic timing. Few talked about the human experience behind the performance. The message was clear. Authority could decide not only guilt, but also how that guilt was displayed. Some spectators felt uneasy. The tone of these events was different. There was no balance, no chance of skill changing the outcome. The ending was known from the start. Still, the crowd stayed seated. Curiosity often overcame discomfort. For many, the distance created by storytelling made it easier to watch. When suffering was wrapped in legend, it felt less real. The mind accepted it as part of the show. Children learned these stories early. They knew how they ended. Seeing them acted out reinforced ideas about fate and power. The lesson was subtle but strong. Resistance leads to downfall, and authority always wins. Organizers took pride in these productions. They planned carefully, timing each moment for maximum effect. The goal was not just punishment but memory. They wanted people to leave talking, remembering, and sharing the experience with others. As these shows became more common, the line between justice and entertainment grew thinner. Punishment was no longer about correction or fairness. It was about impact. The louder the reaction, the more successful the event was considered. Some writers of the time described these moments with concern. They noticed how easily people accepted them. They questioned whether a society that needed such displays was losing something important. Their words, however, were often ignored. The arena rewarded silence. Questioning popular events could make someone seem disloyal or weak. It was safer to blend into the crowd, to clap when others clapped, and to look away when things felt uncomfortable. Those forced to take part had no choice in how they were seen. Their identities were erased the moment they were given a role. Their pasts no longer mattered. Only the performance mattered. Behind the scenes, preparations were efficient and emotionless. Schedules were followed. Instructions were given. There was no space for hesitation. The system moved forward smoothly as if this had always been normal. This efficiency made the events feel acceptable. When something is organized and routine, it appears justified. Chaos invites questions. Order discourages them. As time passed, the crowd's expectations grew. Simple displays were no longer enough. Organizers looked for new ways to surprise, to shock without appearing cruel. Creativity became a tool for distraction. The audience judged these events not by fairness but by novelty. A familiar story told in a new way was praised. Repetition was criticized. The pressure to innovate pushed organizers further from restraint. Some people left the arena feeling unsettled, though they could not explain why. They told themselves it was tradition, that this was how things had always been. Memory reshaped itself to avoid discomfort. Others felt proud. They believed these shows proved the strength of the state. Order, they thought, required visible authority. Fear was seen as a necessary tool. The victims were quickly forgotten. Their names were not recorded. Their stories ended where the performance ended. History moved on without them. This forgetting was part of the design. If the audience remembered too much, questions might follow. Forgetting allowed repetition. The arena, once a place of challenge and skill, had become a place of finality. Outcomes were decided before the gates opened. Participation was forced. Choice did not exist, yet the crowd continued to fill the seats. Life outside the arena was difficult. Food was expensive. Work was uncertain. The shows offered distraction, a break from worry. Many chose relief over reflection. Over time, these events shaped how people understood justice. Fairness became less important than authority. Mercy became rare. Control became the highest value. The state did not need to explain itself. The arena explained it visually. Anyone watching understood where power rested. This visual lesson was powerful. Words could be argued with. Images stayed. As years passed, these practices spread and evolved. What began as an exception slowly became expected. The crowd adapted just as it had before. Shock turned into familiarity. Those who remembered earlier times spoke quietly of change. They remembered when contests had rules, when outcomes were uncertain. Their memories felt old-fashioned to younger generations. The arena had trained its audience well. It taught them where to look, when to cheer, and when to remain silent. It taught them which lives mattered and which did not. It taught them that suffering, when presented correctly, could be accepted without question. This was not done through force alone. It was done through repetition, storytelling, and shared experience. By the time some realized how far things had gone, it felt too late to turn back. The system was too large, too popular, too deeply connected to identity and power. The arena was no longer just a place. It was a message, and that message echoed far beyond its walls, shaping values, behavior, and memory, long after the crowd had gone home. As the years passed, the scale of the arena events grew larger than anyone had imagined in earlier times. What once involved small groups now expanded into massive displays that filled entire days, sometimes lasting weeks. These events were no longer about individual moments. They were about numbers, size, and spectacle. Bigger had become better, and restraint had little value. Leaders competed with one another, even across generations. Each ruler wanted to be remembered as the one who offered the greatest shows. Records mattered. Crowds mattered. Memory mattered. To be forgotten was worse than being criticized. So they pushed further, always searching for something that had not been seen before. Animals from distant lands were brought into the city, creatures most people had only heard about in stories. Their arrival alone caused excitement. People gathered just to glimpse them being led through the streets. These animals became symbols of Rome's reach, proof that the empire touched every corner of the known world. Inside the arena, these creatures were used to create moments of shock and awe. The crowd reacted strongly to the unfamiliar. Fear and excitement mixed together, creating intense emotion. The more dramatic the reaction, the more successful the event was considered. But these large displays required many lives to function. Not just animals, but people as well. Many of those involved had no training, no preparation, and no understanding of what awaited them. They were placed into situations they could not control. This marked another shift. Earlier events had at least included skill and preparation. Now imbalance became part of the design. The outcome was not uncertain. It was planned. Some spectators felt discomfort watching these moments. The difference in ability was obvious. There was no test of talent, only exposure. Still, the noise of the crowd often drowned out quiet thoughts. Group excitement is powerful. When thousands react together, individual judgment fades. People follow the rhythm of the crowd. They cheer because others cheer. They look because others look. Organizers understood this well. They arranged events carefully, building tension slowly before releasing it all at once. Music, movement, and timing were used to guide emotion. The crowd became part of the performance. As these events grew larger, the human cost grew harder to track. When numbers increase, individuals disappear. Faces blur together. Loss becomes abstract. This distance made it easier for people to accept what they were seeing. It felt less personal, less real. The arena became a place where scale replaced connection. Some thinkers of the time noticed this change clearly. They wrote about excess and warned that indulgence weakens judgment. They argued that a society obsessed with spectacle loses its sense of proportion. Their words survived in text, but they did not slow the events. Public demand had its own force. People expected more each time. Simple displays were now considered dull. The standard had shifted. When expectations rise too quickly, satisfaction becomes harder to achieve. Organizers felt pressure to deliver something unforgettable every time. Failure meant criticism, loss of favor, or political danger, so they took risks. They tested limits. They crossed lines that once seemed firm. These massive events were often presented as gifts to the people. Leaders spoke of generosity and care. They framed the shows as acts of kindness, a way to bring joy and unity. The crowd accepted this language, grateful for distraction from daily struggles. Life outside the arena remained difficult. Many lived with uncertainty, hunger, and fear of change. The games offered escape. For a few hours, problems felt far away. This made the arena emotionally important. It became a place where people released frustration, anger, and hope. The louder the release, the more powerful the experience felt. Yet something subtle was happening beneath the surface. Repetition dulled reaction. What once shocked now barely surprised. To achieve the same emotional effect, events had to grow even larger. This cycle fed itself. The more extreme the display, the faster it lost impact. Some began to notice fatigue among the crowd. Cheers came slower. Attention wandered. Organizers responded by increasing pace and intensity, leaving little time for reflection. Quiet moments were removed. Everything moved quickly. The goal was to keep emotion high and thinking low. At the edges of the crowd, a few people turned away. They stayed silent, unsure how to explain their feelings. They still attended, but something had changed inside them. Parents sometimes noticed their children reacting differently. What once caused surprise now caused laughter. The change was subtle but troubling. The arena was shaping values again, just as it had before. It taught people what was normal by showing it repeatedly. Even officials began to feel concern. The cost of these massive events was enormous. Resources were drained. Logistics became difficult. Maintaining such scale was exhausting. Some questioned whether this path could continue, but stopping suddenly felt impossible. Expectations were too high. Withdrawal would cause unrest. So the system continued even as cracks appeared. Reports spread of empty seats during less impressive shows. This worried leaders. Attention was slipping. Without excitement, the arena lost power. To regain control, organizers focused on intensity rather than meaning. Shock became the fastest way to capture interest. This strategy worked in the short term. Crowds returned. Reactions grew louder, but the long-term effect was erosion. Compassion weakened. Sensitivity faded. The arena had become trapped by its own success. What began as a symbol of unity now revealed division. Those far from the center began to feel uneasy. Those close to power defended tradition more strongly. Conversations changed. Instead of asking whether events were right, people argued about whether they were impressive enough. The original purpose of the games had been lost completely. They no longer honored memory, skill, or discipline. They existed to satisfy demand. This demand did not come from nowhere. It had been taught, encouraged, and rewarded over generations. By this point, some leaders openly expressed concern about reputation. They worried how future generations would judge these events. Would they see strength or excess? A few attempted small reforms. They reduced frequency. They adjusted structure. These efforts were cautious and limited, designed not to anger the public. Change came slowly, if at all. The arena still stood full and loud, but something essential had shifted. The excitement felt forced. The joy felt thinner. The need for constant escalation revealed an underlying emptiness. The crowd still came, but not with the same innocence. Experience had changed them. This stage marked a turning point. The games had reached their peak in size, but their foundation was weakening. The system could grow no further without collapsing under its own weight. And while few realized it at the time, the very excess meant to secure loyalty was planting the seeds of doubt. The arena had crossed from spectacle into strain, and the empire, though still powerful, had begun to feel the cost. The change did not happen all at once. There was no single moment when the arena fell silent or the crowd stopped coming. Instead, the shift was slow, almost invisible to those living through it. The shows continued, but their meaning began to weaken. What once felt powerful now felt heavy. People started talking differently after the games. The excitement faded faster. Conversations moved on quickly. Memories that once lasted for weeks now disappeared in days. The arena still delivered sound and movement, but the emotional connection was thinner than before. Some spectators began to stay away, not loudly or proudly, but quietly. They chose work, rest, or family over another long day in the stands. This was not protest. It was fatigue. Too much had been asked of their attention for too long. Leaders noticed these changes. Empty seats were harder to ignore than criticism. The arena only worked if people filled it. Without the crowd, the message lost its strength. At the same time, the empire itself was changing. Borders were harder to defend. Resources were stretched. Officials were forced to focus on survival rather than celebration. Funding massive events became more difficult to justify. New ideas also began to spread. Some beliefs placed greater value on mercy, restraint, and inner discipline. These ideas did not attack the arena directly. They simply offered a different way to understand life and meaning. For some people, this was refreshing. It gave them language for feelings they had struggled to explain. They began to question why entertainment required so much suffering. They asked whether strength could exist without dominance. Writers and thinkers grew bolder. They spoke more openly about excess and balance. They compared past traditions with present behavior and noticed the difference clearly. Their works survived because they captured something true. The arena, once praised as a symbol of order, was increasingly seen as a reminder of imbalance. This did not mean the game stopped immediately. Habits formed over generations do not disappear easily. Many still defended the shows, calling them tradition, culture, or history. They feared that change meant loss of identity. Others worried about control. The arena had been a powerful tool for guiding emotion. Without it, leaders feared unrest. Removing distraction could expose deeper problems. So change came carefully. Events became less frequent. Some practices were quietly removed. Rules shifted. Language softened. These adjustments were small but meaningful. The crowd adapted again just as it always had. Expectations lowered. Surprise was no longer guaranteed. Attention drifted. As years passed, the arena lost its central role. It became one feature among many, not the heart of public life. Festivals changed shape. New forms of gathering replaced old ones. The massive stone structures remained, but their purpose faded. They stood as reminders rather than engines of excitement. People walking past them felt curiosity instead of anticipation. Children asked questions. Parents gave simplified answers. Stories became history. What once felt normal now required explanation. Looking back, historians tried to understand how such a system could exist for so long. They did not see it as the result of a single cruel decision, but as a series of small steps, each justified by popularity or fear. The arena did not begin as something extreme. It became so through repetition, reward, and silence. This realization changed how later societies viewed entertainment and power. The story of Rome became a lesson, not just a memory. It showed how easy it is to lose balance when success is measured only by reaction. It showed how quickly people can adjust to things they once questioned. Most importantly, it showed how humanity can fade when individuals are turned into symbols, numbers, or tools. The decline of the arena was not dramatic. There was no final show that ended it all. It simply became less necessary, less effective, less desired. Time did what debate could not. Stone walls weathered, seats cracked, grass grew where crowds once sat. Silence replaced noise, and in that silence, reflection finally had space. Later generations studied the ruins with mixed feelings. They admired the engineering and scale. They questioned the purpose. They wondered how people had once gathered there with joy. The arena became a warning carved in stone. It reminded the world that power without restraint leads to excess, and excess leads to emptiness. That entertainment without compassion slowly loses meaning. That crowds can be guided, but also misled. Rome's story did not end with the arena, but the arena revealed much about Rome. It showed the strength of organization, the danger of unchecked demand, and the cost of turning suffering into spectacle. History did not erase these lessons. It preserved them. And today, when people speak of those ancient shows, they rarely speak with pride. They speak with curiosity, concern, and reflection. The line that was crossed long ago is now clear, and remembering it is how future generations learn not to cross it again.